Hi there. Welcome to the Imperfect Prophet podcast for women who wonder. Frankly, as we go through life, I'm sure we wonder about a great deal. First as little kids, then as adolescents, then as young women, then as transitional women. What are we calling ourselves these days? And then you get to this point in life, or my point in life, when you're postmenopausal and wondering what's next. Wondering if the parade already passed you by. Join me, Wonder Wendy. I'm going to be your host as we talk about some of these unique challenges that face women today in a new millennium, going through menopause and trying to live a rich, full life. There might even be a few men and younger women that want to listen in too. That's okay. But there's a roller coaster and we're all on it. And I'm going to be your guide to help you figure out when you should close your eyes, when you should hang on, and maybe we'll explore some ideas for what works for you if it doesn't work for me, or vice versa. So join the conversation, pick up your favorite beverage, and we'll talk to you soon. Welcome to the Imperfect Prophet.
So once again, I am coming to you from a location that is neither private nor silent. So if you're a coffee maker, if you hear people, if you hear strange background music, or see somebody moving through the frame, know that these are all elements beyond my control. And one of the things we do when we live the wonderful bucket list life is let go of those things we cannot control. You know that, right? So, that said, let's move on to today's episode. Are you wearing your post-Thanksgiving stretchy pants? What did you learn? With whom did you celebrate? As you can see, I chose to take a getaway with my husband this year and, well, boycott Thanksgiving. I had fish and chips in an English pub. Yes, I did. And we'll talk more about that in another episode. It's kind of a radical concept to skip Thanksgiving. I know. But you know me, I'm not afraid to try something new once in a while. We've done it before, but not for, 15 years. We thought it was time to once again do something very different and reframe our lives. Welcome to another episode of The Imperfect Prophet with me, your host, Wonder Wendy. And the week before Thanksgiving, I kind of had my Thanksgiving. I found myself in a remote cabin with 3 of my 5 siblings. Now, that cabin is a lovely remote place with minimal cellular distractions and no electronic distractions, no TV, nothing. We had to climb a hill to go use our cell phones. So depending on the hour and whether someone was snoring, I would have described myself as trapped or blessed. Now, staying in the spirit of Thanksgiving, let's settle on blessed. I think I've discussed it before. I'm the youngest of 6 children, the caboose, as they like to say. And what does the youngest one do? Well, I'm the precocious one who pokes the bear and asks questions that makes everyone else stop chewing sometimes. And at times they say they value my perspective, but the firm set of my eldest sister's jaw often suggests she might be frustrated by me. I am grateful they have finally stopped treating me like the baby who wouldn't understand. Now, there was one adventure. They were perfectly comfortable to let me drive and actually grateful for my youthful vision and reflexes as we wound up a curvy mountain road that was scarcely wide enough for one car with a sharp drop-off on one side. Going up, it was this way. Going back, it was that way. Ooh, very scary. It was a great few days, sharing meals, conversations, and for those who were still able to make the trek, we did some hiking. Watching your siblings turn into elderly people with physical challenges is hard. My eldest brother was always physically fit, an avid runner until just a couple of years ago. He now moves more slowly and cautiously, and both of my sisters were caring for tender knees and gentle in their movements. It's far easier to remember them as the vibrant people I once knew, the ones who carried me up the hill when my little legs were too tired. Now, if you remember, the eldest is 21 years older than me. That's a big difference. One of those hikes, that same brother, moved slower, but used a walking stick to maintain his balance. We all crunched and slipped across a carpet of late November leaves. Whew, in North Georgia. That's in the USA, Georgia. As we walked, I realized I was channeling my father. I didn't know if it was being surrounded by family or the rural environment, or maybe just a combination of both. Oh gosh, I could hear him in the way I noticed things, looking up that twisting mountain road and saying, I wouldn't want to drive that in the winter. That's so my dad. And then was the way I noticed the bird songs. I had heard that bird song before. Or wait, I recognize that one. What is the name of that bird? So my dad. I noticed the direction of the moss, what he taught me, and the late rising sun breaking over the mountains. Anyway, when my sister pointed out birds soaring in the sky and called them hawks, I heard my father come out of my mouth saying, oh, those are turkey vultures. You can tell by the silver edges on the underside of the wings. Georgia in November doesn't fully wake up until mid-morning because it takes so much longer for the sun to rise over those pointed mountaintops. Something I am more keenly aware of now that I live in a largely flat section of desert. My father was, at heart, a farm boy. That's something you need to know. He was born in a house without electricity, raised in a world where rich meant having indoor plumbing. I remember standing at a family funeral, and it was my Uncle Paul, my father's brother, who said with absolute sincerity, I never expected to live like a rich man. He meant electricity, central heat, and a toilet that flushed inside the house. Yeah, my dad used to walk through the woodshed to get to the outhouse. Now, winter in Vermont, wouldn't want to do that. So yeah, my uncle wasn't joking when he never expected to live like a rich man. He considered those creature comforts all the blessings he needed. Now, this is the world that shaped my parents. They were two college students who met only a few months before Pearl Harbor was bombed on that fateful day in December 1941. They married during the war, only having less than 7 months together before my father deployed to Europe, uncertain when or if he would ever return. Mom was a couple months pregnant when Dad boarded a ship in July of 1944. My eldest brother, the one we visited in Georgia, was born before the war ended and didn't see our dad until he was 16 months old. That meant he was born before the baby boom even began. And then came the rest, 4 more, 10 years. And finally me, born after the baby boom, in the season of zero population. Some of you who are my age, or right around there, might relate to that. Small high school classes compared to what went before us and what came after us. While my parents were candid that my creation was not planned, they seemed pleased to have a bonus track added to the family. Now, being separated that many years means we didn't really all grow up in the same family. Not really. The rules changed. The resources changed. The world changed too. And the people who raised us changed as well. My siblings experienced, basically the wartime versions of my parents, earnest, striving, building something from very little. And I got the have another sip of coffee, Wendy. Good morning. I got the slightly wiser, slightly tired, slightly more seasoned versions. They got to go camping. I got to stay in hotels, but never went camping with my parents. They were jealous of my luxurious options, and I relished the stories of their simpler travels. Maybe that's why this cabin weekend was something. A lot of raw, a lot of remembering, a lot of filling in blanks none of us realized were still open. We compared our stories and our perceptions of the forces that formed us. There were narratives about grandparents, great-grandparents, and all the strange and beautiful, confusing ways history gets passed down. And some stories raised more questions than answers. Now, my mother was a legendary person for getting the last out of everything. She could feed a family with one can of tuna and a few other ingredients. My sisters remember her saying, we could add a ruffle to expand any garment that was getting a bit small or short when the wearer grew. That homespun nature faded a little bit as I came into the family, and resources weren't as tight. And every time we talked about the old house, the one we grew up in on Maple Street, the stories drifted back to something Mom had made, either her sewing machine or in the kitchen. She stitched our lives together with fabric and food. She really was a wonder. Oh, maybe that's where I get it from. And later in this story, I'll tell you about the Foxfire Museum, where I went with my brother. There was a well-worn braided rug, and it was on the floor of one of the cabins. And David and I stood and stared at it. Now, Mom used to braid recyclable garments into colorful floor coverings. Say that one 10 times fast. Just like that braided rug. And seeing it there, I thought of her taking old wool garments and cleaning them and cutting them into strips of fabric and braiding them with her hands, and then carefully stitching that into a rug. And David remembered that too. It was like she'd stepped back into the room with us, and we were connecting over something that we never saw together, but we shared that memory of her. Anais Nin said, we don't see things as they are. We see them as we are. And wow, applying that to a family of 6 is a journey. I suspect that every family sitting down like we did, and maybe you did over Thanksgiving dinner, would find that not everyone remembered the same events in the same way. You might have found that even if you weren't with family. If you were connecting with friends and discussing a mutual time, what was your experience of COVID? All of us saw it differently. For our gathering, my eldest sister brought some provocative questions about how we saw our family celebrating, fighting, and resolving conflict. I don't think we learned how we resolve conflict. I think we learned our family wasn't good at resolving conflict, and icy silence was a preferred tool. Or just let it go. I'm not good at that part. We talked about things we'd never said out loud before, about the parents who lived for years on a pedestal we didn't quite dare question, about how each one of us saw them differently. Remember that Anais Nin quote, we don't see things for as they are, we see them as we are. We misunderstood them differently and loved them differently. Now, my father, he was way too young and too far from home when he first became a father. And he tried to raise 6 wildly different children with a mix of fierce love and questionable strategy. His attempt at the sex talk was a moment of shared laughter when we discussed it in that cabin. It was epic not for its wisdom, but for its sheer spectacular failure. Failure beyond belief. I hope I did better. My daughters would have to answer that question. His protective instincts were strong, sometimes beautifully so, sometimes misdirected. He was learning as he went. I guess we all do. And he never pretended otherwise, except, of course, when he absolutely did pretend he knew everything. Now, my mother tried to be the perfect post-war wife, all gentleness and service, until the steel magnolia in her slipped sideways and popped out. Yes, I borrowed that term from the movie. It was not a Yankee term. Mom could be milquetoast one minute and an iron fist the next. Now, I've been married 3 times, so maybe that combination stuck. My husband calls me the velvet steamroller. Now, me and my siblings, we were forged from all of that. No wonder we each turned out with our own interesting spice blend. There were times when we embraced their role models, thinking it was the key to happily ever after and a long-lasting marriage. Then reality knocked on the door as we dealt with challenges and had to reject some of what we had learned, or at least adapt to it. And sometimes those lessons, what stuck, what didn't, show up in, well, unexpected ways. Let me go back to a particular conversation in the cabin. I didn't expect this one, and it was definitely between my eldest sister and me, although my siblings had some input. It was a memory I thought I neatly tucked away, but apparently she hadn't. It was about our father's funeral. When he died, I took the lead on planning the service, partly because of geography, partly because nobody else really wanted the job, and partly because my father had wanted a more structured funeral than the one we created for our mother 6 years earlier. I tried truly to find rules for everyone when I was doing that planning. I wanted everyone to feel included and yet have a structure to it to keep it under control for time. But when you're planning a funeral, you have a limited timeline before the day actually comes. Emotions were high, and not everyone could speak at the service without it turning into my mother's lengthy service. My eldest sister sent me so many questions. I felt like the emails were unrelenting. What was I doing? Why? Could she read my draft of the eulogy? At the time, I was so frustrated. I was grieving too. I was overwhelmed. I was trying to do it right. What I didn't know until this very cabin weekend, just a few days ago, was how she interpreted my choices. She thought I was telling her that her skills weren't needed, that she had no place in the program, that she wasn't valued in this moment that mattered. And the heartbreaking part, I thought I had asked her to be the head of the family at the door, greeting people, guiding them to guest book, a role of hospitality and dignity I thought fit her perfectly. But she never got that message. Did I forget to say it? Did I say it badly? Did she hear something totally different? Because, well, grief might make us all a little bit deaf. Your guess is as good as mine. Now, I'll be honest, there was a part of me that wanted to defend myself, but a bigger part just felt that small, striking ache, the kind that comes when you realize your best intentions landed sideways. Sitting in that cabin, 2 adult women with more than a decade of life between us, revisiting a 9-year-old wound, well, it stunned me. We clutched our mugs, you know how you do that, in a vice-like grip as we struggled for understanding. We sat there in the long pause that follows truth, steam rising from our mugs, words hanging unfinished between us, not in a painful way, in a revealing one. Well, I guess that is a little bit painful. There was still a raw edge to all of that. It reminded me that so much of what we think we know about family lives in the space between what was said, what wasn't said, and what we were too overwhelmed to hear. Sometimes healing happens years later in a cabin in Georgia when someone finally says, "This is how I felt." So big sis, sorry for the slight. Certainly wasn't intended. And now the whole world knows I'm capable of saying I'm sorry. And I really, truly am. And the fact that I'm still talking to you about this right now may mean that there is still room for greater understanding and forgiveness. I hope you found some of that during your holiday gatherings. And on our final day of the trip, my final day of the trip, the others had left. And David and I, the bookends, drove to the Foxfire Museum. Now, that's a place devoted to preserving Appalachian heritage. And some blah, blah, blah. You can tell I'm not quite awake. Some of what we saw belonged to the South, but much of it felt like home, Vermont home. There were tools we recognized. There was a wood shop in the museum, and our dad had owned some of those same tools, those simple, handheld, non-electronic tools, that could make anything long before there was a time when Amazon could deliver, well, anything in just a matter of hours sometimes. We saw bowls formed out of a piece of wood. We saw baskets made out of bark. My dad probably could have done all that. I don't know, never saw him do those particular crafts, but we did recognize the tools that were so dear to him, some of which he'd inherited from his father. Anyway, there were the stories we'd heard and shared, and we realized there's a farm craft that lives in our DNA, whether or not we use it. And more than once, I opened my mouth and heard my father again. Not my imitation of him, like actually my dad coming out of my mouth. It was eerie and delightful all at once, especially standing beside a brother who never lived in the same house as I did. He graduated from college the month I was born. He was already living his adult life before I took my first steps. And yet here we were, identifying the same hand tools, remembering the same or very similar stories about our grandfather. We were kind of finishing each other's sentences about things neither of us personally experienced. We were shaped by the same story, but at completely different points in its timeline. And that's family, I think. A shared mythology interpreted, in our case, 6 different ways. My siblings and I grew up with the same parents, but not with the same childhood. My eldest sister heard dominance where I heard challenge. I took on that challenge all too often. I still have trouble with getting a dare because I want to do it. She took one message, I took another. Now, our father once told me he'd never want to sit across a negotiating table from any of his daughters. Now, other of my sisters might have heard that as caution or a put down. Well, I heard that as pride. Same words, different ears. There were so many small moments like that, sitting in that cabin, walking those trails, standing in that museum, moments when something clicked into place that I didn't even know was loose. As I drove away at the end of the weekend, I felt grateful for the raw conversations, the gentle ones, the old stories that changed shape when someone else told their version. Can you picture that? Taking a story and looking at it from a new angle and seeing it completely different. And all the understanding that came from hearing all our childhoods overlap, kind of like a crazy quilt. Have you ever seen a crazy quilt? It doesn't have necessarily a defined pattern. It has all these disparate fabrics, and yet it comes together as a beautiful mosaic of sorts. I found one more quote that fit perfectly with my story and might help you with your family gatherings this holiday season. Siblings are children of the same parents, each of whom is perfectly normal until they get together. That was Sam Levinson. Now, I had to research Mr. Levinson so I could tell you about the man behind that quote. He was a humorist, a writer, and an all-around champion of capturing family chaos with a smile, often seen on TV starting in the 1950s and well into the 70s. He had an uncanny ability to observe families the way some people observe weather patterns, noticing the storm fronts, the warm fronts, the sudden gusts of emotion, and the occasional need for shelter. If you have ever sat at a family table and thought, "Are we all like this?" Sam would pat your hand and say, "Yes, darling, it's perfectly normal." So it wasn't a Thanksgiving trip. No turkey, no pie, no matching sweaters. I don't think my family ever did matching sweaters, at least not my siblings and I. But it was a table of sorts, a place where old stories resurfaced over barbecue, where roles shifted, where truths landed with unexpected clarity. And as the holiday season crept in around the edges of my everyday life, I realized I was bringing something back with me from the cabin, something I wanted to share with you. A sense of curiosity about the people I gather with. Softness. Maybe a little grace. Not because I learned something brand new, but because some things I thought I knew rearranged themselves just enough to help me see familiar faces with different eyes. And honestly, that feels like a pretty good way to walk into this season. So here's your bucket list challenge for the week. As you gather, or as you reflect upon your gathering this past week, with family, friends, neighbors, or your chosen family, look at one familiar face with fresh eyes. Notice something new. Ask a question you've never asked. Let one old role loosen its grip just a little. You don't have to make it profound. Just make it intentional. Because sometimes the smallest... Wow, I always do this. I get to the end and my brain starts racing. Sometimes the smallest shift in how we see one another becomes the beginning of a new, wonderful chapter. And while you're at it, maybe look at yourself with new eyes too. You've grown. Maybe you've softened a little bit. Or maybe you've developed an edge that you needed to protect yourself. You've survived things your younger self never imagined. And if you've done all that, what can you do moving forward? So this holiday season, remember, there may be old wounds. There may be new wounds. Make room for understanding. And if this episode brought something up for you, made you think of somebody, please share it with them and have a conversation. Maybe say, "I saw myself here," or "I saw you here, and I just wanted to share this." And until next week, stay hydrated. I'll be talking to you soon.
Like what you heard here today? Then we should be friends. I suggest you join my Facebook group. It's a good way to connect. We can have a conversation. Ask me questions, whatever you want to do. It is called the Wonderful Bucket List Life. That's Wonder-Full Bucket List Life. Be a bucket lister and join me on this adventure. Or you can go to my webpage, which is Wonder Wendy and Friends. Join the mailing list, learn about the book I wrote, adventures that are coming up in the future, and other podcasts. I look forward to talking to you soon, and stay hydrated. Have a great day.